This is Wassaja, and I'm Mark Trahant. The goal of our program is simple: a news magazine for Indian country. 30 minutes of television that illustrate Native challenges as well as our successes. More than a century ago, Elias Boudinot, the first editor of the Cherokee Phoenix, described his newspaper as a vehicle of Indian intelligence. That's exactly what we would like to do with Wassaja: convey Native intelligence by telling great stories, stories about ordinary Indigenous people doing extraordinary things. Extraordinary things like this: a container of menthol chest rub for colds. More on that shortly. Why Wassaja? This name sets the tone for what we hope to accomplish. It was the name of two great newspapers from our history. The first Wassaja was published by Carlos Montezuma a century ago. He wanted his paper to be the freedom signal for the Indians. Montezuma was a fascinating character. He was from the Yavapai Apache Nation in Arizona. He said his birth name was Wassaja, meaning signaling or beckoning. As a child, he was captured and sold to a white photographer. The pair traveled a lot, taking pictures, and even joined the Buffalo Bill Wild West show. Eventually, Montezuma worked his way through college and then medical school. He was hired as the school doctor for Carlisle Indian School, where he learned to hate the Bureau of Indian Affairs, an agency he thought kept Native people from their potential. He even turned down two presidents, Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, who both asked him to head the agency. Instead, his newspaper called for the elimination of the BIA throughout its run. Montezuma preached freedom. Montezuma's news magazine ended its run in 1922, after the editor conceded he was not well. His work schedule was grueling. He would practice medicine during the day and then work on his news magazine starting at midnight. Sleeping must have been optional. He returned to Arizona, where he died of tuberculosis among his own people. Remember this? It's a generic brand of menthol rub. Sells for about $5. The official history is that a man named Lunsford Richardson sold a mixture in 1905 called Vicks Croup and Pneumonia Solve. That's essentially the Vicks that's around today. Richardson said he came up with the formula in the 1890s. Or did he? Dr. Montezuma developed a similar medicine for students at Carlisle some 7 years earlier. I was compelled to depend on myself to use the best methods at my disposal to alleviate pain and suffering, he said in an 1893 speech. He said he discovered menthol while working as a clerk in Chicago as a youth. He called it a plaster and told other physicians how to make it from ordinary menthol, alcohol, ether, chloroform, and oils. Ordinary Indigenous people doing extraordinary things. The name Wassaja surfaced again in 1973. Rupert Costo, Cahuilla, his wife Jeanette Henry Costo, Eastern Cherokee, launched a national newspaper based in San Francisco. Costo picked the name of the paper because of Montezuma. He described himself as Montezuma's, almost as if it was a political party or a movement. Like Montezuma, his publication was to be serious, exploring public policy. Along those lines, Costo wrote President Gerald Ford in 1976, asking for his answer to questions. He said, "We operate quietly, but we have a great influence upon grassroots Indian opinion." He said 100,000 people read Wassaja. Indian affairs has been a critical issue in every administration for 200 years. It will not go away, and it promises to become even more critical in the coming 4 years, he told the president. And so it is today. Indian affairs, the Indigenous world, remains a critical issue. We will not go away. We have stories to tell. Across the country, more women than ever are running for office. And that's true for Indian country, too. More than 57 Native women are running for state legislatures, governors, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and for Congress. Wassaja looks at two of the candidates, Deb Hollen in New Mexico and Sharice Davids in Kansas. But first, the context. That story starts in Washington, D.C. I'm standing in front of the United States Capitol, where representative democracy is supposed to live. At the top of the Capitol, there's a statue called Armed Freedom. It's been on the dome since 1863, the statue of a female figure wearing a military helmet and holding a sword in her right hand, and a laurel wreath and a shield in her left. She's also wearing what the artist Thomas Crawford considered a Native American-style fringed blanket. She faces east, toward the main entrance of the building. This one icon pretty much captures the American experience for the people indigenous to this land. It's war, or at least the threat of war. It's a reference to Native America without as much as a reference to any specific tribe. And it's a stone reminder that not all of our people are represented in this representative democracy. The first Congress was elected in 1789. Not here, but in New York's Federal Hall. There were 65 members elected, all men, all white men. 45 steps, one for each of the presidents of the United States. National Public Radio's show, The Hidden Brain, recently calculated the odds of a country being run by 45 men in a row. Quote, if men and women had an equal shot at the White House, the odds of this happening just by chance are about 1 in 36 trillion. 93 steps, the number of presidents and vice presidents. The office of vice president may be worth at least more than a footnote in the long history of tribal relations. During the Great Depression, a Broadway musical, Of Thee I Sing, spoofed one Charles Curtis. A character asked, well, how did he come to be vice president? The vice president in the play was named Throttlebottom. He responded, well, they put a lot of names in a hat and he lost. And so what does he do? Well, he sits in the park and feeds the peanuts to the pigeons and the squirrels, and then he takes walks and goes to the movies. Last week, he tried to join the library, but he needed 2 references, so he couldn't get in. Charles Curtis was Herbert Hoover's vice president and his running mate. He had been the Senate Majority Leader representing Kansas. He was a member of the Kaw tribe and spoke at least some Kansa. But instead of being an American Indian hero, he's best known for being the author of the General Allotment Act of 1887, the Curtis Act, the very vehicle used to rob Native people of some 90 million acres of land. His biography, From Kaw Teepee to Capitol, dismisses that entire tragic era. In a few words, saying the allotment simply, quote, wound up the communal affairs of the 97,000 Indians of the 5 civilized tribes. There have been some 21 Native American men who have served in Congress, including Curtis. While he was in Congress and later the Senate, Curtis was referred to by his colleagues as the Indian. His biography cites several encounters with members who asked, Indian, what would you do about this? But the book is at best boastful as it describes Curtis's career. It isn't very probable, however, that any little Indian boy thinks a great deal about it one way or another. We're at step 144, and that's an interesting one. There have been 144 people sent to Congress as delegates. The premise of the U.S. political system is that tribes are governments. Tribes are political entities enshrined in the Constitution. Yet, and this is huge, tribes have never had the institutional representation in Congress that others have had. Today, there are 6 delegates in Congress representing Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. And 144 have served in Congress in that role. Indian country gets shortchanged. The Navajo Nation, a geographic political entity, is far larger and has more people than the Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and the Northern Mariana Islands, where only 53,000 people live. But Navajo is spread over 3 states. Its population is not quite enough for a House seat electorally. The thing is, Congress makes up its own rules for delegates. It's not a constitutional act. You never know which way the wind is blowing in Washington, and today is a strong one. We're at about 5,000 steps. The 60th Congress. That's 1916, when Jeannette Rankin was elected the first woman to be elected to Congress from Montana. Rankin's story is amazing for several reasons. She is not only the first woman elected to Congress, she is the first woman elected to any national legislature in a Western democracy. She's the only member of Congress to have voted against both World War I and World War II. And when she was elected, Montana did not have a district system. There were 2 members of Congress elected at large. Voters could pick her as their second choice, a strategy that she promoted successfully. Think about the distance. 10,273 steps. 10,273 members of Congress, and not a single one a Native American woman. That's a long way to real representation in this seat of democracy. Why do these stories matter? Because this country cannot be the country it wants to be unless it includes everyone, making sure that all people have a voice throughout the government. This year, women are breaking campaign records across the board as a referendum on President Donald J. Trump and his policies. Native women are a part of that, and just by running, they are holding this country to a higher standard, one of representative democracy.
I'm Deborah Hollen, and I'm running for New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, and I'm a member of Laguna Pueblo. I was born in Winslow, Arizona because my grandparents lived there, lived and worked on the railroad there for 45 years, and my dad was in the military. He was a 30-year career Marine, so whenever he had to go away somewhere, we always moved home to stay with my grandparents, and so that's the reason I was born in Winslow. But in spite of the fact that my grandparents lived away from the Pueblo for that long, almost a half a century, they were very diligent about making sure that we practiced our traditions. They would have feast days in Winslow. My grandfather was always working very hard to ensure that our traditions and our culture were a part of our lives. The railroad was part of the assimilation process, working very hard to move Indians into mainstream society. They promised jobs to any Laguna who wanted a job, and they would come to feast days and sign people up to work on the railroad. And my grandfather was actually from Jemez Pueblo. Him and my grandmother met at boarding school in Santa Fe, and he came out to Laguna, and that's where he signed up from. Although in Winslow, they had what they called the Indian camp, so they all lived together in boxcars in essentially a Pueblo village. Except they were boxcars instead of rock houses, and they were still able to carry on living together in that way. My grandmother was actually living in Winslow already because she was babysitting for her sister who was older than her. So they reconnected in Winslow, and that's when they eventually got married. My grandfather, he went out and helped to start the Santa Fe Indian Band. They went by train to Eisenhower's inauguration and played in the parade, and he started an all-Indian baseball team that won state championships. So he also was working hard to move us into the future successfully, while making sure that our traditions and our culture were preserved. So we had the best of both worlds, I think. I'm a single mom. My daughter and I have lived and worked and gone to school in Albuquerque for a long time. My mom lives out at Laguna. A lot of my family lives out at Laguna. My grandmother was there for decades. And so I spend a lot of time at Laguna, but the irony kind of is that I would have loved to live at Laguna, but I didn't qualify for housing there. And I couldn't afford to actually build my own house out there. So it always seemed, just easier to be in Albuquerque, and so that's where I've landed. I know I've arrived when Mark Trahant walks into your campaign office.
I hope not.
You've definitely arrived. Definitely, we're ready to make a change, and I think part of it is there were a huge number of women in 2016 who really expected to have their first woman president. When that didn't happen, and you know, we have in office right now somebody who has displayed his disdain actually for women and minorities, that it made them want to make a change. So I think that's one reason. Also, I've talked about the Me Too movement. I think that's empowered a lot of women to tell their stories, to be a part of our own future, and certainly if you look at the list of members of Congress, there are an awful lot of men on that list, and so we feel that we can be that we can represent our people, our communities, every bit as well as men.
Welcome to Native America Calling from Studio 49 in Albuquerque. I'm Tara Gatewood. Did you know there are only 2 individuals who identified as Native Americans and citizens of their native nations in Congress right now? Neither of them are women. With what we've uncovered, a Native woman who is also a member of her tribe has never held a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate. And it's time for a woman with Native roots to win a seat in Congress, is what we're hearing from folks. What about you? And what do you think has kept them from getting elected so far? We are going to bring in another guest who's joining us here in Studio 49 today. We have Deborah Hollen. She is a candidate for the 1st U.S. Congressional District of New Mexico, and Deb is from Laguna Pueblo. Deborah, thank you for being with us. Why is it that Native women are putting their name in the hat, or, basically standing up and saying, I want to represent?
For me, there have been over 10,200 members of Congress elected and never a Native woman. And the way I look at it is we should all strive for diversity in our public discourse. And I'm the voice that Congress has never heard, and so perhaps by me having a seat at the table, I can help add to the conversation, bring my perspective and my experience, the way I was raised in a military Pueblo household, and maybe I can help to add a voice and solve some of the problems and issues that our country faces. And
what about the idea of the first Native American woman?
Well, I'm excited about that because I think, what I think about are, Native girls in communities, and rural communities, and communities where they may not feel like they that maybe they have the opportunities that folks in big cities have. I think it's important for us to be role models for young women, and so I'm excited about that. I would be excited right now running for Congress. I don't have any role models right now in Congress. There wasn't a Native Congresswoman that I could go to ask for advice or ask for support, and so I want to be that person for other women down the road. I want to be there to say, yes, you can do this, and I'm going to help you do it. I started out like a lot of people start out, as a volunteer. I used to go into campaign offices of candidates that I liked, ask for lists of Native American voters, because I thought I might be able to help with those folks, getting them out to vote. And that turned into, now a 15-year passion for getting underrepresented people to the polls. I'm a voter registrar. I was the epitome of grassroots organizing, knocking on doors and registering voters, and then driving, people to the polls, going to the Navajo Nation getting, the grandmas, they'd put their scarves on their head, and away we'd go to the polls to make sure that they had an opportunity to vote. And so that's still my passion today, just doing it in a little bit different way. Between 2010 and 2017, I put on about 200,000 miles on my car. That was just here in New Mexico, driving to every corner of the state. In 2012, I was President Obama's State Native American Vote Director, so I concentrated my efforts in Indian country. But when I won my state party chair office in 2015, I was driving everywhere to every county and every small community in New Mexico. So, I really wanted Democrats to win in 2016, and we did. Those of us who are Native and running for office, when we think about the sacrifices that our ancestors have made for us to be where we are, I think it gives us, or it gives me anyway, a stronger resolve to succeed.
And right now we are going to introduce Sharice Davis. She is a candidate for Kansas 3rd Congressional District, and Sharice is Ho-Chunk. Sharice Davis.
So we could have a good conversation about what issues are important to the community.
I'm Sharice Davis. I am Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin, but I live in Kansas now, and I'm running for Congress in the 3rd District here in Kansas. I looked at the field of candidates and frankly just, I saw a void just in terms of kind of voices that were being represented in the race. And certainly this time in history, we're seeing a lot more women running for office. And that was something that I have always told people: we need more women running, we need more people of color running, we need more openly LGBT people running, and here I was ready and willing and able, and figured, if not now, then when? So I decided I would jump in the race. I keep saying how surprised I am. We're in 2018 and we are still having all these firsts. And so I'm excited to be part of this wave of people who are taking risks and looking to not only make history, but also help this country progress toward the things that we all think that we should be standing for as a country. I think it's a hard road to walk. Anytime someone decides that they're going to run for office, and my lived experience tells me that if it's not hard, it's probably not going to have as big of an impact. So I look forward to the challenge. I think that people are ready for something different. I think that's part of why we're seeing particularly young people standing up and getting more engaged and being more active. I'm very heartened and optimistic about not just the future of this district, but the future of the country, because we have so many more people getting involved and engaged. And I'm very excited about that. I'm excited to be part of that too. When I think about representation in our federal government, one of the things that I have strongly felt, and part of why I did things like applied for the White House Fellows Program, is because the more of us that do these things, whether it's running for office, whether it's participating in one way or another in the political sphere, that the more of us that do that, the more of us that will do that. And that's true of us as women, true as Indigenous women or Native women, is that it starts to become more of the norm that we're involved and engaged in this way. I mean, certainly, like, Native women and women in general have been very much involved in a lot of the ways that our country has progressed over these last few hundred years, and then even before that. But I think it's looked different. We've been pushing the envelope from different directions, and certainly having gone to law school and having opportunities because my mom worked really hard to make sure that I had opportunities has really given me the chance to come at this ability to change things from a different perspective than we've had before. You know, and I think that's part of why we're seeing so many Native women running now, is that, you know, certainly we're building off of the opportunities that our mothers and grandmothers helped lay out in front of us. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, because then that means, you know, that's what we're doing for the next couple of generations.
I've been collecting the data about Native Americans running for office for about 6 years now. It's been fun to watch, because every time I publish a spreadsheet, I hear from people who want to add names. Have you thought about so-and-so? And the list grows. This year, that story has been picked up by the national media. The New York Times, The Nation, even Elle magazine. That tells me something. The country is finally paying attention to Indian country's talent. Stories about ordinary indigenous people doing extraordinary things. I'm Mark Trahant. This is Wassaja.
Pack your bags and the memories. Don't let nobody tell you otherwise, till they see the world through your eyes.